So this is a re-recording of my presentation for the Placing Experiment Conference. And I want to thank here once again the organizers, Sarah Pogoda and Zoë Skoulding. I'll mention here that my presentation does not include aspects of my paper. So this consists of the description of the film, my discussion of Jude's biography and film style, my discussion of the Romanian New Wave, my discussion of Jude's work vis-a-vis the Romanian New Wave, the history of Romania and its impact on contemporary issues, including the current proxy war in Ukraine. The 2021 film, Bad Luck Banging or Loony Porn, subtitled A Sketch for a Popular Film, won the Golden Bear Main Competition Award at the 71st Berlin International Film Festival, bringing the work of the Romanian filmmaker Radu Jude to global audiences. It was also selected as the Romanian entry for the Best International Feature Film at the 94th Academy Awards in 2022. The press kit for the film describes how the history teacher, Emi Silibiu, finds her career and reputation under threat after a sex tape is leaked on the internet. The film is described as a scathing commentary on hypocrisy and prejudice, which makes use of irreverent humor and unconventional form. Jude mentions that the film was the result of heated discussions with friends about real-life stories from Romania and other countries in which teachers were being fired from their jobs for banal reasons. Contemporary witch trials in the courts of public opinion had for Jude a similar character as internet sex chats and the posting of amateur porn, wherein subjects that seem trivial and shallow nevertheless cause powerful reactions. The tabloid topic of obscenity raises the paradox that contemporary societies react collectively and fervently to minor transgressions, but ignore more important problems. Jude says, quote, "Obscenity is the theme of this film, and the viewers are constantly invited to compare the so-called obscenity of a banal amateur porn video with the obscenity around us and the obscenity we can find in recent history, whose traces are all around," unquote. Reading in detail is for Jude a montage operation and not simply a mistake. According to him, if history and politics are part of the film, that's because the story itself has a deeper meaning if we see it in a historical, societal, and political context. As he says elsewhere, I couldn't describe the situation in an artistic way without connecting it to bigger things like the environment, or ideologies, or politics, or philosophies. The film is about what is around the story rather than the story itself. This question of the micrological, I argue, is not interpreted by Jude in the fashionable sense of minor literature, as discussed by Gilles Deleuze, or even in terms of the Foucauldian notion of micropolitics and microphysics of power, but in terms of the Hegelian Marxist notion of totality. In that regard, it is possible to define Jude's film and his work more generally in terms of avant-garde cinema and what the filmmakers of the French New Wave referred to as la politique d'auteur, meaning the political understanding of the role of critical aesthetic practice vis-a-vis the film industry, mainstream audiences, and universal history. Although the main theme of Bad Luck Banging may seem like a random contemporary subject to exploit for the sake of vicarious entertainment, Jude's not an attention seeker interested in self-aggrandizement through shock tactics, putting his audience in a moral corner, and dumbing down the value of the many cultural, intellectual, and cinematic references that animate his work. Like the German filmmakers of the 60s, Jude's work reflects and incorporates the temporal rupture of Stalinism and the so-called revolution that took place in Romania after the fall of the Ceausescu regime in 1991. His work is not straightforwardly avant-garde, however, since the cultural connection to radical class politics is inoperative in contemporary Romania, and so Jude explores instead the progressive themes that are popular with cosmopolitan audiences, like racism, sexism, homophobia, and xenophobia. The question of obscenity in bad luck banging relates to cultural, moral, and political condition of Romanian society after the fall of communism, and, in an unexpected sense, in the context of the US-NATO proxy war in Ukraine. As the term pornography is today used to describe trauma porn, disaster porn, and other porn phenomena that have little to do with sex acts, Jude's film adds cancel porn to the list of contemporary troubles. As a micrological phenomenon, cancel porn describes the terroristic culpabilization of one individual or member of a group of people for the misdeeds attributed to that group or to all of society. In the era of privilege theory, critical race theory, intersectionality, and decoloniality, for example, where liberal rights discourse and universality are rejected in favor of the philosophical nihilism and cultural relativism that proposes the incommensurability of cultures and the guilt of members of specific social groups for the disparities that motivate the concepts of structural and institutional inequalities, the notion of social justice replaces both constitutionalism and emancipatory politics with postmodern formulas like language games, the rhetoric of empowerment, and a pseudo-materialism that makes short shrift of ideologies of bourgeois progress and Marxist class struggle to mobilize affective communities downgraded to the status of assemblages around consumer lifestyles, networked politics, and horizontalist movementism. So here I'm going to be referring to a term coined by Nancy Fraser or developed by Nancy Fraser, progressive neoliberalism. So Fraser contrasts the progressive neoliberalism of politicians, for example, like Barack Obama or Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, with the reactionary neoliberalism of politicians like Trump, let's say, or Bolsonaro, and also the progressive populism of politicians like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. So in the case of progressive neoliberalism, what you find is the causes associated with identity politics are linked to the interests of the billionaire class, whether that's in Hollywood, Wall Street, or the tech sector. By and large, a product of the petty bourgeois professional managerial class in the culture and knowledge industries, the Great Awakening, quote unquote, has further depoliticized the public spheres of production in the direction of bipartisan neoliberal authoritarianism, making progressive neoliberalism, where identity politics is added to the corporate sectors of the global economy, including the film industry, to make neoliberalism seem like the socially minded alternative to the increasingly fascistic conservative right. In this endgame between the two sides of the same global capitalism, the radical left is the typically excluded third term. In this context, far-right and alt-right figures, politicians, journalists, commentators, citizens, militias, entertainers, and so on, react to the politically correct cancel culture of so-called cultural Marxists and the so-called Loony left by using the same tactics as the activist left to advance a populist and demagogic version of the culture war that seethes in jouissance as it breaks norms and taboos in a typically conservative, if not openly fascistic plumbing of the lower depths. Against this, Jude's bad luck banging mobilizes the apparatus of cinema in what Stephen Garrett refers to as a gonzo dialectic comedy. These motifs of contemporary cancel culture, where the wildest and most disingenuous claims and accusations are promoted by centrist and right-wing media, have not only defined the problems of police violence, rape culture, and the electoral sphere, but culture more generally. It is in this social morass that bad luck banging or loony porn has made a rare critical incursion. Whereas most cultural producers and intellectuals are happy to ratify the postmodern trends that are promoted by neoliberal institutions, oblivious to the fast approaching annihilation of humanity by global warming, that is, if nuclear exchange does not deliver the coup de grace, Jude modestly and cunningly takes up the many strands of critical thinking and critical filmmaking that we have more to live for than the spectacle of luxury and aggression pandered by today's post-political elites. In the essay version of my talk, I relate Bad Luck Banging to Jude's overall production, to the new Romanian cinema and its complicated historical antecedents, to suggest, in the terms of Jacques Lacan's Four Discourses, that Jude's Discourse of the University gives provisional cover to a submerged discourse of the avant-garde analyst. Having abandoned the complete program of the revolutionary left, the societies of the former East and West have become culturally and politically disoriented. The last word on this conundrum is related here to Zizek's unexpected defense of the proxy war against Russia, rescinding his usual critique of false choices and bowdlerizing left internationalism. Like Emmy in Bad Luck Banging, and like Jude, Zizek has gone out on a political and possibly avant-garde limb, reminding us of what the Emperor Marcus Aurelius once said: "What affects us is not the thing itself, but our opinion of it." So just to give you a quick sense of the film, it opens with the teacher Emmy and her husband Eugene making an amateur sex video. The film's divided into three parts. Part one follows Emmy doing errands in Bucharest. This is during the 2020 COVID pandemic, but after the initial lockdowns had ended. Emmy discovers that she's been called to a parent-teacher meeting because the video has been leaked online and the students have been sharing it. Part two is an image and text glossary of terms about contemporary Romania, made in a sort of Chris Marker, Jean-Luc Godard manner. In part three, the leaked sex video is shown at the meeting. Emmy's video is the object of a show trial that reveals the attitudes of the parents. Emmy defends herself with more integrity than all of the parents combined. The conclusion has three different endings, and so there's three endings to the third section. And I want to mention here also that my discussion of Jude in terms of the discourse of the university is related to previous work of mine. This graph shows my working with Peter Berger's theory of the avant-garde, his model of the historical development leading to the bourgeois era in which avant-garde art makes the most sense. And what I argue, using the work of Pierre Bourdieu, is that the bourgeois habitus is no longer the dominant habitus, but that today what we're experiencing is the predominance of the petty bourgeois habitus. So rather than avant-garde work, what you have predominantly is creative industries work, as well as activist work. And that fact emphasizes the middle class or petty bourgeois PMC character of cultural production today. I relate this also to Lacan's Four Discourses. Not included here are the discourse of the capitalist and the discourse of the master, neither of which I think capture Jude's work. Jude's work is toggling, I would say, between discourse of the analyst and university. Aside from the countless reasons that contemporary film scholars have for rejecting the notion of an author's cinema, there's enough in Jude's work to recommend him to the generation of post-war new wave cinemas and to the rank and file of non-commercial and avant-garde directors more generally. His reluctance to outwardly identify with the socialist or communist left, however, not only allows him to fly under the banner of the Romanian new wave, or New Romanian cinema, which is successful with European and foreign audiences, but to figure within what Jacques Lacan in his Four Discourse refers to as the discourse of the university. In this instance, the structure S2 over S1 in a direction of A over split subject finds that S2, the system of knowledge, is in the position of addresser. While it seems dismissive to associate Jude's work with the critical tendency in creative and engaged art among the global professional managerial class, there's nothing in what he says to suggest that he's uncomfortable among the cosmopolitan petty bourgeoisie in the creative industries, save for his interest in the avant-garde. In this case, S2 refers to the command economy of neoliberalism and addresses A, the objet petit a, or Jude himself, in the position of the network of signifiers and function of the big other. In terms of interpassive belief, this means that the work is difficult to locate in relation to standard symbolic regimes of meaning and expectation. What the feature film as commodity is unaware of is S1, the master signifier, as the hidden symptom and function of truth. This could be the political master or the aesthetic master. Insofar as Jude himself is made into A as the instrument and vanishing mediator of the other's desire, this position split subject, or the audience as split subject, that is produced as surplus, jouissance, and function of loss, implies that there's a game at work where the system of cinephilic knowledge that is skewed by neoliberal relations of production is shared between Jude and his audience. It should be said that while this structure allows for the repressive desublimation of culture and politics that one has come to expect in a post-political society, it is removed in several ways from the discourse of the capitalist, and so retains cultural, if not political, credibility against the most conformist and exploitative aspects of commercial cinema. The level of impotence in the discourse of the university is between split subject and master signifier, which makes sense for Jude, since he's very much concerned to make work that is open to interpretation. One of the ways that Jude plays the game of culture in an avant-garde manner is the way that he relates to film festival prizes. Jude would like to think that cinema is a serious discipline and not clowning around. He compares film festivals to book fairs, where you typically find people who love books and where authors can meet their audience without much fanfare. In contrast, cinema is an expensive art that makes a significant contribution to GDP. Moreover, the tradition of entertainment and celebrity turns film festivals into something else. Jude says, "When you put people on the red carpet with fancy dresses and costumes like a glamour event, I always want to shy away from that." Nor does Jude think that awards are a measure of whether a film is good or not. Comic films, he notices, almost never win prizes. This is why Jude doesn't like being on juries and prefers discussions about film. When Michael Haneke won a Palme d'Or at Cannes, he said that it was the happiest day of his life, a sentiment that Jude considers a bit pathetic. On the other hand, he's also noted that people do not forgive someone if they become successful, and so the pressures and rewards of success do not appeal to him. Success has nevertheless caused Jude to be considered by film critic William Stodder one of the most singular and challenging directors working today. The challenges faced by filmmakers like Jude are not only questions of production, but also of reception. There's no substantial film community in Romania except on the internet. There was no neo-realist period in Romania, and the country, according to Jude, does not have a real film history. Most of its canonical films deal with history from an existential, psychological, and metaphysical perspective. Contemporary Romanian cinema tends to follow this tradition, and Jude feels like something of an outsider because he's seen to make directly political films. In terms of film style, Jude's work is based on small budgets, tight scripts, and a blending of realism with documentary. In other words, a desire to capture reality in a neo-realist way. Jude modestly claims that he's not particularly talented or intelligent and does not have a grand vision except to depict what is around him. He laments that his generation was cut off from the avant-garde traditions of the country, which produced artists like Tristan Tzara, Constantine Brancusi, Isidore Izou, and Eugène Ionesco. Many artists left because of fascism and later communism. What they brought with them was the sense that cinema can be playful, vulgar, and radical at the same time. Jude considers it his job to connect with and expand this tradition. Bad Luck Banging is an homage to Ionesco, he says, and an opposition to the Orthodox Church that crushes sexual minorities, as well as what is known as the quote-unquote sexo-Marxism of free love and homosexuality. In the 1980s, the communists scrubbed nudity from films and television, and so in the post-communist 90s, the culture had difficulty incorporating pornography, which produced new kinds of regression. Jude's 2015 film, Aferim, breaks out of the Romanian New Wave mold by looking into the history of the Romanian family. The winner of the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival and shortlisted for Best Foreign Language Film at the 88th Academy Awards, Aferim is the first film to examine the history of slavery in Romania and establishes several recurring concerns in Jude's work. One, how histories of the past are connected to the present. Two, the use of archival traces of the past in representations of the past. Three, ways to highlight the constructed nature of documentary as well as fictional accounts of the past. And four, the question of whether or not historical representations can produce progressive change in the present. The film takes place in Wallachia in the 1830s. Two lawmen, a constable and his son, hunt down a fugitive Roma and return him to his boyar owner. Of all of his films to date, Scarred Hearts of 2016 is the most amiable and compelling. Based on the autobiographical novel by the Jewish Romanian writer Max Blecher, who died at a young age from an illness made worse by doctors, the film, which is set in the 1930s, follows the young chemistry student Emmanuel as he arrives at a sanatorium to have what turns out to be spinal tuberculosis treated. His illness is developed as a metaphor for the existential dilemma of Romania sinking into oblivion as it makes its deadly pact with Hitler. About his work, Jude says, "In a way, to make a film is always very questionable. To make a film about history is even more questionable. To make a film about the Holocaust is 10 times more questionable. I want to raise this issue because I see that most people engaged in political theater, political filmmaking, social art of some kind, and etc., are 100% convinced that what they're doing is useful, important, that it changes life, society, and so on. I have some concerns about that, which I wanted to highlight with this film." Unquote. So this is an image of Radu Jude, who gave an interview while giving an interview in France somewhere, June 20, 2022. And we see him in this interview wearing a yellow and blue t-shirt with yellow and blue socks. So obviously these are references to Ukraine, or it would seem, though it's not clear exactly what Jude is saying about the situation. The death of the liberal class and the rise to the status of hegemony of petty bourgeois ideology in Romania has allowed authoritarian nationalism to fill the cultural vacuum that was occupied by activist dissidents in the Ceausescu era. The mediation of global online platforms allows conservative values to be combined with the new lifestyles encouraged by the obsession with wealth, power, and status. Jude's answer to this is a post-neo-avant-garde use of montage techniques that contest the mainstream conventions of cinema. His work also appeals to anti-racism and anti-sexism as content that solves his political dilemma. His is an experimental cinema that resists commercial pressures and that makes connections to his peers in the avant-garde traditions of legitimate culture. I'm not against commercial cinema, he says, but my fear is that if you make a commercial industry, like what happened in Poland or Czech Republic, then big independent movements can be lost, which is a pity. I hope they don't commercialize everything. On the other hand, his work highlights the far-right nationalism that is generated in part by neoliberal globalization, but that has a specific and complex history in the case of Romania. Rather than an allegorical mode that gladly participates in the traditions of Romanian cinema in an effort to establish national values and put Romania on the map, as Hajnal Kirali argues about the Romanian New Wave more generally, Jude's lifeline to the French New Wave is its politics of international solidarity. However, rather than full-on socialist internationalism, Jude is, like most in his generation, a reluctant avant-gardist whose post-Marxist compromises make his work more descriptive of social problems than prescriptive of solutions. In contrast to the cultural relativism and political nihilism propagated by postmodernist approaches to woke identity politics, where the truths of historical catastrophes like patriarchy, slavery, the Holocaust, and the Gulag are made into the privilege of the victimized groups and their erstwhile allies, Jude's historical purging of the Romanian past, as Ella Bittencourt puts it, comes across as a much broader, universal nightmare of history. Nothing coming from Jude himself would contradict this view, even if he contends that those things that are human and universal always appear in a local form. In this regard, Jude's use of cultural montage would seem to skew charges of cultural appropriation and critiques that dismiss films against anti-Semitism as products of the Holocaust industry. Afirim produced good reactions from the Roma community, he says. Quote, in my opinion, the history of slavery is more a history of Romania and the problem of Romania than the problem of Roma. In the way the Holocaust for me is more the problem of Germany than the problem of Jews. If I was Jewish, I would have made films about the Palestinians, unquote. Emancipatory politics and universality therefore operate the same way on both sides of the track. This is a modernist or avant-garde politics rather than a postmodern politics. But Jude is not entirely consistent, and his focus on cinema is how he resolves a problem that he willingly concedes cannot be solved by cinema. Even more damningly, he says, I don't believe that if I make a film, I can change the world. If it was possible to do that, I wouldn't, because I would be afraid to change the world. The culture industry forces you to do things in certain ways or on certain themes, Jude says. Quote, if you touch topics like racism, sexism, LGBT, and so on, you're not considered a good enough artist, unquote. While this isn't a problem for contemporary Hollywood, Jude seeks to maintain an outsider stance. Avant-gardism and legitimate culture therefore allow him to avoid rather than decide where his political values lie. He says, I quote, one of the possibilities of art is to criticize and speak about the bad parts of any time or any society. I'm not affiliated with any party or any ideology in full, so I don't need any reason not to make a film against communist times or against capitalist times or against fascist times. I don't consider myself completely a political filmmaker. The cause of political art has a bad reputation among my colleagues. Belief in culture therefore accounts for Jude's interpassive approach to politics, at least in terms of what he tells journalists. He defines avant-gardism as freedom and research rather than as the concern with artistic quality. The communist generation that made art in line with party dictates and nationalist concerns were focused on so-called good art, art that's not overtly political. When a Romanian filmmaker doesn't follow this tradition, they are considered a propagandist. However, outside Romania, a different set of rules apply, where metaphysical truths are substituted for the race and identity metaphysics that legitimize neoliberalism and multicultural faces in high places. Jude sides with humanity rather than with partisan identifications. This is not an entirely dubious stance for an avant-gardist who's at odds with the people around him and in the context of today's PMC post-politics. One question a socialist would ask is the difference between history or historicism and historical materialism. History can be used for different purposes, and in recent years, the neoliberal governments of the West have begun to legitimize fascism in the interest of propping up corrupt regimes in Ukraine and elsewhere. Jude does not demonstrate a materialist understanding of racism and anti-Semitism in the context of 20th century fascism. In fact, his moral appeal to anti-racism has much in common with the reactionary tendencies he rejects. The collapse and conflation of different historical experiences in terms of eternal truths like the human condition leaves out of consideration the vision of a new society. Jude is more than modest and more than aware of this, but limits himself to presenting the dilemma and leaving the solution to others. What is to be done with Emmy? What is to be done with Romania? What is to be done?
And while I'm here, I just want to mention that I'm very much interested in any kind of contemporary cultural practice that's critical of these strands of thinking, intersectionality, decoloniality, privilege theory, etc. As far as I know, there aren't very many artists who are taking this on. There's Sam Kersen, an artist whose work is being slated for demolition in Vermont. But if anyone knows other artists working along these lines, please email me. I'd be happy to know about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.